Welcome, everybody, to the 72nd episode of the My Generation podcast. Today, once again, we'll be revisiting a subject that we talk about quite a lot on the show. It's a really great one, and we get so many different perspectives on. It's the music creating process. Today, we're talking with local Kent musician Luke Hill. Luke is a musician and film production student based in Folkestone, and is mainly involved in the sort of 80s synth sound, acoustic music, and some film scoring, amongst other things as well. Welcome to the show, Luke.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here.
Thank you for coming on. So yeah, in this we're sort of just going to deconstruct your music creating process. For you then, where does your music begin? Where did your love for music start?
Yeah, I guess I've loved music for, I guess as long as I can remember. My family aren't particularly sort of music oriented, but my older brother would play like Bon Jovi records when I was young. So I think growing up around sort of 80s music, that was kind of what I had around me when I was young. So I would belt out like Living on a Prayer quite often. And that was kind of my introduction to music, really. Apart from sort of pop music that would have been on at the time, I think one of my favorite bands one of my favorite like pop groups when I was really young was Aqua, who did like Barbie Girl and Dr. Jones and those kind of songs. I have a memory of one of my earliest memories of one of my birthdays of playing Barbie Girl like out of the speakers and just going nuts around the living room. So kind of that mixed with 80s rock. So it was always a weird start in terms of where music was coming from. But it was always something that I loved, and I always loved to sing. Not very well, albeit, but I used to love to sing around the house. But it wasn't until I was listening to sort of pop music throughout the sort of early noughties when I was about 11 or 12. First act I went to see was Justin Timberlake. So again, very pop oriented. That was when like Top of the Pops and stuff was coming to an end. So I was obsessed with all of that. So I listened to a lot of radio back then. But then, I picked up a guitar when I decided to learn how to play guitar at school. Didn't stick with it for all that long in terms of lessons, but I did buy a guitar and sort of self-teach myself X amount of things in terms of chords and things like that. So I guess the earliest I can remember is really, really young, sort of 6 or 7. Mostly pop music was what I was listening to back then. And I mean now it's all kinds of music, but I think having that weird mix of what my brother was getting me into when I was younger, and my dad as well. My dad would play like just the same Police CD over and over again. So anytime I hear like Every Breath You Take, it's like it reminds me of my dad. But he literally had like one Police CD. So I kind of obsessed with that still, to be fair. And my mum would listen to a bit of everything. My mum was lucky enough to go and see Michael Jackson when she was younger, which is something I'll always be very jealous of. So she did have really, like, my parents do have great music taste, but they just never really listened to it. It's still not something that's around the house all that much, apart from maybe when the radio's on. But not in terms of like, I'm not sure where my love for music comes from. When I look around my room and I've got my record collection and stuff, like that's not something that was handed down or anything like that. But I would say, inspiration and sort of introduction to music definitely started when I was very young, just from all sort of angles of music in terms of genres and stuff. So
well, it's interesting because having your music around the house actually does quite a lot for inspiration. I know I spend like 90% of my time listening to music, and in this episode of the show we will be featuring one of Luke's songs later on. It's called Long Way Home. We'll be playing that later on in the show, as well as our regular features. So we've got Sammy Bacon doing an album review, very fitting for the music episode. And Harry Munday, who comes on and does film reviews. That all coming later up in the show. But Luke, I wanted to dive in then. So you talked about creating music on an acoustic guitar at the start, and you were self-taught. So how did you teach yourself?
So just to begin with, I picked up like lessons at school when I went to a grammar school, and they offered like guitar lessons there. taught me sort of very basic chords to begin with. And I'm pretty sure I drove the guy crazy because I was just not getting it at all. And I think I probably stopped the lessons because I was like, God, this guy's going to like whack me with a guitar because I'm just like breaking strings when I tune and I can't get it right and things like that. And I would come to him with the most random of requests to teach me something. He'd be like, oh, here's this like sheet music. And I'm like, yeah, I want to learn this Nickelback song. And so I think I just drove him nuts, and I eventually gave it up. Probably just didn't stick at it enough. But I decided to take what I did learn, which really was the sort of like very basic chords in guitar, and I took them on, and then basically YouTube became, in more ways than just music, YouTube became my life for about 5 years, I think, when YouTube was really sort of first bursting onto the scene, pre-Google buying it out, which makes me sound ancient. But I literally just used to live on YouTube for everything. If I wanted to learn how to do something in Windows Movie Maker, I would YouTube it. If I wanted to learn a chord, I'd YouTube it. And I pretty much just started out, playing and trying to get my fingers in the right places, to put it as basic as that. I'm not particularly the most sort of technical guitarist in the world. If I were to be in a band playing guitar, I would be playing I'd be like the third rhythm guitarist at the back in the shadows. Just you can barely hear me, but I'm there somewhere. And that would be fine with me. That's fine. I definitely don't pretend to be able to play sort of particularly well. But my best friend basically became a capo because if you're familiar with them, essentially you can just pop them on like any fret, and then all of those chords that you can play, all like 10 of them, become something new. They sound a little bit different. So that sort of became my favorite thing. I would definitely covers would be the sort of short answer. I think Green Day, Time of Your Life, which I imagine anybody that's listening to this that's learnt guitar has probably learnt that as well. It's like one of the easiest songs to play, and it was also one that my guitar teacher at the time was like, you like Green Day, here you go, here's a nice easy song that you can show off to your friends. So I think Time of Your Life was the first song I ever learned how to play, and so I think covers, and then sort of watching things on the internet and people playing songs. But I kind of still do this. Sometimes I look up covers and then I'm like, yep, do you know what, that's got chords I just can't play. I think there's always been a line with guitar that some people that are really determined to play, to learn something like an instrument, push beyond that. And I sort of never really have, because I've never sort of loved guitar so unbelievably much that I've sort of pressed to be a guitarist. I've always just sort of learnt enough to be like, if I want to make a song, I can make a song and I can play the chords the way I hear the melody going in my head. So I've done that with a few other instruments, like bass. Bass is even more simple, really. Again, if you're not sort of taking that advanced step, like I've got a lot of incredible friends that can play really incredible bass, and it's a different animal when you're sort of upping it to that, not just playing the sort of basic root notes. Same with drums. Again, I'd never had any drum lessons, but I used to drum in some bands, and it was only ever just sort of like learn how to keep a beat, buy a drum set, drive my parents crazy, that was it was very similar with the guitar. So I would say that just sort of listening to other people, watching other people, certainly. I also had a lot of friends that could play guitar, so I would get them to teach me things. I would probably just be really annoying because they would spend ages perfecting something, and I'd be like, oh, just show me that really easy bit so I can just play that chorus over and over and over again. I can't remember when I first started writing music, but definitely covers would be sort of where it all sort of started, I think. And I know it's a cliche, but practice makes perfect. I don't think I'd ever describe anything I do as perfect, but it certainly gets better with practice. And the more and more you do things, the more, like, when you go back to playing that chord that sounded a bit gammy when you played it the first time, all of a sudden you can play it a bit better. And I think a lot of people struggle with the strumming of guitar as opposed to the chords. And I can definitely relate to that. But once it feels really lovely when you first, it's not just with guitar, but any instrument, when you really start to play and it starts to not sound awful like it has been, and you're sort of like, do you know what? This is actually not horrific anymore. My dog isn't going crazy, and yeah, so it's quite nice. But yeah, I would say mostly watching tutorials online, and yeah, listening to songs and trying to sort of pick them apart and play them, very basic versions of them, I would say. Yeah, that would probably be how I taught myself my very limited knowledge in guitar.
And I guess for you then, one of the biggest reasons you were able to sort of experiment is because you didn't learn guitar really from anyone, so you could come in with all these experimental ideas that went against rules, and because you didn't really know the rules to start with. Is that something that helped you sort of build your own unique style?
It definitely does now. Yeah, I think that was I sort of touched on that when I was saying, like, my guitar teacher was sort of pushing me the way that, like, he would have learned and sort of his styles, and I was like, hey, can I learn this Nickelback song? Because I was just kind of like, I really just want to play guitar to enjoy it and not sort of like be unbelievably good at it, which is, I guess, a lot of like great guitarists put in hours and hours and hours of work and know the guitar inside out and things like that. And I've always sort of just been like, I'm going to learn these chords and see what I can do with it. And yeah, so yeah, I think certainly now a sort of mix of genres that I like to play with would definitely come from just being able to experiment and listen to all, like learning a cover. I'd learn like an Eminem song, which doesn't really have, there aren't really any guitar chords for Eminem songs because he tends not to have them in his songs. But I would try and learn some chords that would fit like an Eminem song, and then I'd play some of that, and then all of a sudden I'd be like, oh, this kind of, I can kind of go with something from this. And so I think, yeah, not being sort of classically taught an instrument. However, I know a lot of brilliant musicians that are classically taught, and then they sort of take that and build on it. I mean, Ed Sheeran is, not that I know Ed Sheeran, it was a bad segue, but Ed Sheeran was classically trained, and he plays music that is not classical at all. But he took everything that he knew, and it's sort of like that, but the opposite. I'm basically saying I'm the opposite to Ed Sheeran, which actually fits perfectly. So yeah, that's it definitely has made a bit of a mix of genres going forward. But I tend to pick up a genre, and like you mentioned at the beginning, I play like random 80s synth music now and then because I'm like, oh man, I'm just really into this at the moment. So I'll just put the guitar down and fire up some synthesizers and play with that. And again, the sort of genre doesn't really bother me. I tend to just really enjoy making songs and trying to finish a song, and I don't really mind if it's not like I just make acoustic music or I just make this music. I quite like the sort of experimenting between genres. I've made some songs that I wouldn't quite call rap, but would sort of fall under the rap genre if you really had to push it anywhere. And again, it's just like I'm listening to a lot of that at the moment, so I'm going to make one of those songs. So yeah, I think you do have to be open to everything. Otherwise, unless you have a clear drive. Again, most of like the most successful musicians will probably have been very driven to learn, one sort of style and perfect it. I just tend to do it a bit more wavy and sort of just dabble in, instead of just sort of having a firm foot in one thing. I'm just sort of like dipping my toes in a bunch of different stuff, which is just great for me. I sort of get my release in music from that, without sort of having to take it sort of very particularly seriously, I guess, as like an artist. I've never been sort of obsessed with like, oh, I'm going to make a hit album or anything like that. So I just kind of want to write songs, and I don't know how they're going to sound. In fact, I've got a few songs that I've tried in various different genres, and I quite like all of them. I just was like, oh, this kind of sounds fine as all electronic, and this kind of sounds fine as just guitar. That's a very long-winded answer to your question.
And well, so you've obviously, because you experiment so much with the genre, I guess there's still going to be a drive for you, something that's focused. Is it maybe to do with what your songs are trying to do? Is the story of a song something that's quite important to you?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I think the story of a song is kind of everything for me, actually. I think it differs. It differs in how a song would originate, but I tend to, if I was watching a film and I hear a line that just resonates, that might be something I'm like, I'm going to write that down, and almost like just create a story from that. Nearly all of my songs, especially the ones that I've recorded, are from personal experiences, mostly just like relationship breakups. I think that's what nearly every musician would tell you. Yeah, I think there's a quote that like every song is about a girl, or something like that. But it's true to a certain extent, that I think a lot of songwriting comes from that sort of heartbreak. To be honest, none of my songs are particularly like happy, but even when you pick apart happy songs, you can find where it comes from quite quickly. So I would say, yeah, you're right. I think that the sort of drive does come from sort of story of a song. If I really feel like if I'm down about something, I will pick that apart and write a song about that, and it'll probably come out sad, but I think that's just the way that I would vent, to be honest. I listen to some of the songs now that don't make me cringe, but they sort of like, they take me back instantly to what it was that I was feeling at that time. And that's quite nice. I think that for me becomes as like a release of whatever it is that I was going through at the time. Everyone does different things to kind of get through stuff. And I tend to jot down lyrics every day, to be honest. I've got over 700 notes in my phone, that are just like, some of them are just like one or two lines. Some of them are like several like verses from different songs that I want to make. So I tend to just sort of write little bits of songs a lot of the time. But then, I don't know, some of my songs have also come from that I've just bashed them out in a day. I remember listening to a song by Lucy Rose, who's one of my favorite artists, and I listened to one of her songs and then sat down, played a few chords, with a few, like, I really like sort of plucked sort of instrumental stuff, not always just sort of rhythmic chords, but playing sort of particular strings, because you can be sort of a bit more intricate. I found something that I quite liked, played that on loop essentially, and then made this whole song in a day. It was one of the first songs I actually finished and was really like happy with, and I was like, do you know what, I was like, oh, maybe I can write like this. Maybe I can just sort of like, it comes to me, but it doesn't. It's always different. I imagine you've spoken to a lot of musicians, and everyone will say something different. But mine is definitely, they come from random places. Often come from films. I think I draw a lot of inspiration from films. I think, again, because of the sort of fictional nature of the characters and the story, and specifically dialogue. I find, like, if I hear a powerful line delivered, I can be like, man, that sounds like a lyric. That sounds like that what that guy said. I feel like that, or what that guy said, I remember feeling like that, or having a conversation like this, and then that might spark a song. So yeah, I don't just write about everything that happens to me. I think Taylor Swift did that for a number of years. She made a lot of money doing it. Fair play. There are various different sort of avenues that I tended to go down. In fact, some of my favorite songs that I've written on were from when I was in a band called Cool Kids Assemble, which is like my favorite band name ever. My friend Ed, who created that band, and we used to write together. But I would just send him a load of lyrics. Like, I would just write. I think I made him a file called "Here Is Everything Ever," and I literally just copied and pasted all of my notes that were just sort of blurts of lines. And he always struggled with writing the actual lyrics, but he was such a good sort of composer of a song. He could bring it together, and we had this really nice dynamic where I would just blurt out a load of words, and he would put them together in a way that I wouldn't have seen. So he'd almost take like 2 lines from a verse that I wrote from a random note, and then the next 2 lines that would be from something else that I never intended to go together, and it just made this whole different sort of song. For a while I thought, like, is that cheating? Like, because music to me has always been like, surely this is exactly how the person's feeling, but it's really not always. You know, a lot of songs can just be sort of like manufactured. You see a lot of, I know we're talking about hit songs potentially, but you know, where they have sort of 4 or 5 writers and collaborators, and it's that's a whole sort of different ball game. But in terms of singer-songwriter stuff, I tend to love listening to a song that you can tell is coming straight from where that person's been at, or an experience that they're going through, or a feeling they have. So I would say that is my drive is definitely sort of listening to something that is going on in my life, and then building around that. I'd say even Long Way Home, that you said you're going to play a little later on, is the whole idea for that song was again a relationship that I really wanted to have, and the other person just wasn't that into it. And I ended up sort of reflecting on one night we were walking along the beach, and I sort of turned that into a sort of story where it was like her walking off and me sort of being left behind, which is kind of where the lyric comes from. And so I would say that, yeah, I sort of like to build on something that's real, very real, and hide it potentially, because it's difficult. It's a very vulnerable thing, I think, when you get a song that you've written, it's hard to just be like, yeah, I wrote this about that girl. It's difficult. So I think songwriters tend to hide really deep in there. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's very evident what's going on, which is also wonderful. But I tend to kind of hide how I'm feeling inside the song and build something on top of that that's, I guess you could say, fabricated, but just sort of, it's more sort of extenuated. I guess it's like me saying like, oh yeah, you know, like I feel this way, but then writing a movie about it, and then you sort of, with movies, you could sort of add the sort of drama to it, and it's a bit more dramatized. So yeah, but no, definitely story is. I like songs to have a story and a sort of narrative to them, and instead of just sort of being like a repetitive chorus, or I like songs like that too. But as someone that likes the actual songwriting, I tend to try and make music that honestly that I hope somebody else just listens to and connects with, because I think all of my inspiration comes from other artists, and so yeah, I like to make songs that maybe someone can hear and be like, oh, I kind of get that, or what that person is saying, I can relate to. I think is the real is where the spark of music essentially for me comes from, because one of my favorite artists, a band called Frightened Rabbit, the singer Scott Hutcherson was one of my all-time heroes, and he wrote music that just was so honest, so brutally honest. Some songs just him and a guitar, and they're very sad, very powerful, moving songs, but they almost like mourn for you when you could listen to them when you were sad. And I don't know, there's something just happened, and it's the same with happy music that makes you happy. You listen to it, it puts you in a good mood, because you're like, you're singing the lyrics and you're like, man, this is my life. This song's written for me. And I feel like that with a lot of sad music as opposed to a lot of happy music. I'm always like, man, this song is written about me and that girl that were together for 2 months in 2013 or whatever. So it's I would say I like to make music that's honest somewhere.
Yeah, well, and I think it also then almost becomes a little bit of a diary for you, because for you as a creator, it then documents points in your life. But as an audience member, as someone who's listening to it like me, I just get entertained by your music, and I've obviously listened to A Long Way Home a fair few times now, and the way when I listen to it, I get different things from that song to what you described. So I think it's interesting how lyrics can mean one thing for the creator of the song, and another for other people. So something we've mentioned on the podcast before is the BBC radio piece, the day the internet stood still, that we made. I don't think it will be on BBC Sounds anymore by the time you're listening to this, but Long Way Home featured in it, and the reason I felt it was a good fit for it was for different reasons to what you've said the song actually means, and so hearing it at the end of that piece gives it a different weight. And it was really great to hear sort of where it comes from. It feels very raw and real. Now after we go to some of our features, I'd love to speak to Luke about the film side of things as well, because I thought it was interesting what he was saying earlier about getting inspiration from films. Obviously, Luke and I are both film production students, so after Sammy's film album reviews and Harry's film reviews and the song, we'll go into those details. But starting off firstly with Sammy Bacon's film review. You know him, every single week Sammy Bacon comes to the My Generation podcast with a weekly album review. So here is the album that Sammy recommends for you all to listen to this week.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Sammy Bacon here to recommend you an album from the legendary indie punk funk band Parquet Courts. If you don't know who Parquet Courts are, what the hell are you doing? Listen to Parquet Courts, man. Anyway, I'm recommending you their latest to date 6th studio album, Wide Awake. Wide Awake is the best album in the Parquet Courts catalogue, and moves on and evolves their original hard punk aesthetics, adding in funk elements and a strong emphasis on grooves. And that's what Andrew Savage of Parquet Courts said in an interview on KEXP, that was one of the focuses of the album. And you really hear that it's a groovy, funky, punky album, and it brings in more complex instrumentations such as omnichords, synths, pianos, keyboards, etc., etc., etc. And this album blends social commentary, but there are several introspective moments, and this album is just so tight. Oh, it's so well played, it's so well produced, it's amazing. The album kicks off with the song Total Football, which is a song about how to describe it? Unity, I guess, and working for each other. If you don't know about Total Football was a Dutch football concept in the 1970s where every outfield player could play in every position. So it's this idea that in society we must be total football-esque and support each other. But it's also a song about how we must have freedom in society, and that collectivism, and there's one line where Andrew Savage sings, collectivism and autonomy are not mutually exclusive, clearly saying that we can still have freedom and be ourselves and have our own identity, but still support each other. The track Death Will Bring Change, which is about co-guitarist Austin Brown losing his sister in a car crash and coming to terms with that. This album is just fantastic. The song Violence talks about the normalization of violence within society, and Andrew Savage sings, "Savage is my name, 'cause savage is how I feel when the radio wakes me up with the word suspected gunman," clearly a reference to the gun crisis in America. And I could talk forever about every track on this album. If you somehow haven't heard of Parquet Courts, I implore you to listen to them. If you like your punk, if you like your funk, some people call this woke funk, and I think Parquet Courts kind of poke fun at that with the title track Wide Awake. It's a very simple song, and I think it's kind of poking fun at people who claim to be woke and sort of don't really see the bigger picture, and thinking they're woke and being woke are very different things. I know that sounds pretentious and a bit rambly, but I don't know. There's also Freebird 2, which is another introspective moment on the track, and I think is about kind of looking back on your past and where you've come from and who you are now. It's a great song. I saw them at End of the Road Festival in 2019. They put on a fantastic live show. Parquet Courts, Wide Awake, please listen to it. Great album. See you next time.
Thank you for that, Sammy, and we'll tune in once again with Sammy next week to hear what the next album he reviews is. Let us know in the comments wherever you're listening, YouTube, Soundcloud, Spotify, Apple, or anywhere else, what you think of the albums Sammy recommends. Next, we're going over to Harry Munday. Harry's also a film student with me and Luke. He's from Hastings but based in Canterbury, and here is the film that Harry recommends you to watch this week.
This week's film recommendation is more of a unheard of film by the Coen brothers of recent, and that is fits in very well to the theme of the episode, that being acoustic music. It's the indie movie Inside Llewellyn Davis. This movie just follows the life of an acoustic singer aptly named Llewellyn Davies as he struggles with keeping a relationship along with trying to sort out his musical career. And it features everything you would expect from the Coen brothers. Just really natural dialogue that just draws you into every word that the characters are saying, while also maintaining a good music atmosphere to it, which is quite original from the Coen brothers. So this week's film recommendation is Inside Llewellyn Davis.
Thank you for that, Harry. We'll tune in once again with Harry next week to hear what his next film review is. Also, let us know in the comments if you've seen the films that Harry recommends. Let us know what you think of them. But now, as Luke said earlier, we're going to be listening to his song Long Way Home here on the My Generation podcast. It's a song about a relationship. It's an acoustic song. Is there anything else you wanted to say specifically before we jump into the song, Luke?
No, it's an old recording, but yeah, I hope you like it.
Share my body warmth with yours and walk you home along the shore and put your left hand in my right and let our fingers intertwine. It's a long way home. It's a long way home. Can we go back the way we came? I think my shoes have seen better days. Retrace the steps we made just to make the same mistakes. Turn around, 'cause I've lost my way. And maybe I'll lose my mind, but I'll be back someday. Oh, how could I have been so blind? How did I get so far behind? Oh, it's such a long way home. I'm learning life is far too short to waste your time matching socks. Take your chances, let your voice be heard. Fill the skyline with your words. Oh, turn around, 'cause I I've lost my way. And maybe I'll lose my mind, but I'll be back someday. Oh, how could I have been so blind? How did I get so far behind? Oh, it's such a long way home. Turn around, 'cause I've lost my way. And maybe I'll lose my mind, but I'll be back someday. Oh, how could I have been so blind? How did I get so far behind? Oh, it's such a long way home.
And that is A Long Way Home by Luke Hill here on the My Generation podcast, featuring in the BBC radio drama The Day the Internet Stood Still for the Screen South New Creatives programme that I was a part of. Really great to play this song here on the show. And so now, Luke, we're going to dive into what I said before we started doing the features, the filmmaking side of things. What do you think the relationship is between film and music? Because I know you've got jukebox cinema where pre-existing songs are put into films, which is something quite prominent in a film like Shrek, and then you've got obviously people who create bespoke music for films. What do you think the sort of relationship is between film and music?
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's like, for me, sound in film is such a huge thing. Honestly, some of my favorite films come from moments where music is played, whether it's just in the background or like you were saying, whether it's a song that's put in there. Yeah, it's interesting. Like you say about Shrek, it's weird. Sometimes you're like, man, this song is just made for this film or this scene. It's hard, and now you listen to one of those songs and you're like, well, it's Shrek. Like, but it was never the intention of that song. It's so interesting. So films can sort of make and break songs as well. It's really, really bizarre. But some of my favorite songs that are even just one-off songs, I usually sit and watch the credits for films these days. So I tend to get the sort of information from there. But again, that's actually how I discovered Frightened Rabbit. I used to love a show called Chuck on TV with Zachary Levi. There was, again, really random montage, just very, very quietly underneath was the sort of root notes of a Frightened Rabbit song, and I was like, what is that? I need whatever that is, I need it. And it's a bizarre one, but I think the sort of opposite to jukebox is what I really like as well, because I do love sort of scores to films that have something that sort of repeats, like a soundtrack or something like that, a theme that sort of comes in and out. I think back to like Inception and films like that have like beautiful scores throughout it. Well, and most recently Joker obviously won the Oscar for original soundtrack as well. Again, that is just something that comes back through the film. Again, that wasn't actually, interestingly, with Joker, that was something that was written by the composer when she wrote the script, and then they played it on set to try and, because they loved it, and they played it on set whilst filming, which is something really, really different to what other films would do, just so that set the tone for the pacing of it and the sort of dark nature of the film, which is really, really interesting to me as well. So there are lots of different ways that sound in film can go, but I tend to just I love it when a song is perfect for a film. Obviously, it's a filmmaker's dream, and I can guarantee you that that filmmakers have songs specifically in mind. In fact, I think I've written little short films before. I'd never got around to making them, but that were just based around songs. I'd listen to a song, and I would envision a story that's going on. I used to do this with a Nickelback song over and over again, and I think that's essentially what music videos are, because I love a music video that isn't actually related to the song at all. It's its own narrative from start to finish, and the song just fits it. You know, I don't really care about watching a music video that is just doing what the song says. You know, so I like a good sort of separate narrative going on in there, and I think that for me, that's when I listen to a song, I'm always sort of envisioning something to it. So yeah, it's strange how you can draw inspiration for a film from music, and you can also draw inspiration for a song from a film.
Yeah, and there are so many sort of joint examples, aren't there, where, like what you said about Joker, when I think Joker, I think Frank Sinatra's That's Life Now.
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right with that. Every time I hear that now, since then, I can see Joaquin Phoenix miming it at the end of that film. That's the way I see that now. I totally agree. It's and that song is huge, you know. But that is now for us the way we see that. And yeah, it's so super interesting to find out, like, whether that was the sort of, you know, like Jim Jarmusch actually is someone I'm writing about at the moment. Was very much like, I want this song. This is the song that is going in this film. And again, it's really interesting. I think it all comes from a place of writing, because I think you listen to a song and whether it's the feel of it or the words of it, that you just think that fits. And like you said about the song I wrote for your The Day the Internet Stood Still, the reasons you liked it for fitting your project was something totally separate to the way I had it penned. But I think that's kind of the beautiful thing about film and music, is that it's open to interpretation regardless. You know, you can listen to a very happy song and it be the saddest song in the world because it reminds you of a sad time. You know, I think that's another part of film and music, that it's got this nostalgia that attached to it, for good and bad reasons. Like I said before, there are songs that will always remind me of my dad, and I know sometime in the future that's going to become maybe a sad song, and I won't want to listen to that. You know, and there are songs that you attach that someone had at their funeral, and you know, it doesn't like ruin the song, but it changes the meaning of that forever. And I feel quite similar about films. There are some films that, I don't know, maybe like an ex-girlfriend loved, or your parents just would not stop watching, and now you just can't watch it anymore. So it's oh God, it's kind of endless how much you could sort of delve into it. But yeah, no, I definitely think I love music in film. I think whether it's a soundtrack or like you say, sort of jukebox cinema, or a song that's perfectly put in there, that sort of carries it along. It doesn't have to be. I'd be more than happy to watch a film that has music that I've never heard before. But yeah, there's a band that I love called Angels and Airwaves, actually, that wrote a concept album, a double album called Love, and then they made a film, and the film is called Love as well, and it's the soundtrack to the entire film is the album without the lyrics. So if you listen to the instrumental version of the album, it's essentially the original soundtrack for the film, but there's like 12 or 13 actual songs in there that are all about 5 minutes long, but each song sort of ekes into the next perfectly. So when you watch the film, you're almost sort of like miming the words that aren't there, because they're actual songs. that's something that's really interesting to me as well. Something I'd love to do in the future. But yeah, it's kind of endless. But yeah, definitely comes from a place of writing.
Yeah, and interestingly, Angels and Airwaves were a band that I was introduced to by Connor Jenkins, who we also did a music creating process episode with. That was number 15 of the podcast. That feels like a lifetime ago, episode number 15. But yeah, they're a great band, and I think it's so true what you said about the placement of the music in the film. I think the context is also extremely important. So, you know, with the Joker example, where they place the song in the movie changes the meaning of the song. And, you know, if they played it at the start of the film as opposed to the end, it would have changed the context completely. And I think that, you know, even within my project, based on where Long Way Home was put into The Day the Internet Stood Still, would have changed the audience's feeling and connection. And
yeah, you can't just chuck a song in anywhere. You know, you can't just film you walking down the road and put you know, AC/DC Highway to Hell over it. It doesn't just work like that. You can't just get that feel that it takes, you know, perfect sort of placement and often foresight, like you say. I think a lot of these aren't just sort of, oh, let's put this song in there and see what feel we get. I imagine there's a lot of happy accidents that have happened that way. But no, it definitely comes from a place of sort of planning, and I can only imagine that a lot of filmmakers that have chosen songs for films, or vice versa, where they've been like, look, can you write something for this film? Because that's happened in a lot of cases as well. Obviously, especially in terms of original soundtracks. But yeah, it definitely comes from that original place of sort of writing. I think back to Dirty Dancing. I watched a really good Netflix documentary on it, and the song at the end, the sort of finale song, that I've Had the Time of My Life, was written just for the film. They chose, like, they basically put out a call for, they had spent all their money on the songs that they already had in the film, because it was a period drama technically, because it was set earlier than it was filmed. So they spent a lot of money on getting parts of the songs that feature in the sort of background of it, songs that would have been played at that time. And so then they put out to original artists, unknown artists, to send in tapes. And literally the last, I mean, I don't know how much I believe it. It's a very Americanized documentary, but they say the last tape they listened to ended up being that I've Had the Time of My Life, the boom, 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 dum, 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 that kind of that. And it's so strange, because that was an unknown song. And if you've a fan of Dirty Dancing, it's the most perfect part of that film. It's literally written for it. It feels like it's composed to the screen perfectly. So it's super interesting to me, how it goes hand in hand, and whether or not they're like happy accidents or it's completely planned. But either way, I think again, it comes down to that interpretation, like you say, is if I'm watching a film in a certain mood, I might hear something a certain way, or, you know, get a certain vibe from it. And I think that is ultimately sort of where my favorite part of music lives, which is that interpretation.
And so we've now talked about, you know, the audience experience of taking in a film, but you've done a bit of sort of film scoring yourself. I know that obviously recently you've put out your student film project, or just finished creating it and actually editing it through the lockdown, which is you know, interesting story in of itself. But did you do the score for that movie?
No, I'm doing my own edit at some point. Literally, I'm just trying to finish my essays at the moment. But no, I will be doing some sound for it. I think in the Harry Barton, who did a great edit of our student film, sourced some sort of free sound music and blended a few of those things together. But no, I'm definitely going to give that a go. I did one for. I did a score for one of our other friend Luke Snare's films, so I did some for that. It's something that I really have only just started doing, but really enjoy. I think what we've just been talking about is that it's something totally new to me to essentially mute a film and then create music to that, because you can totally change what is going on in terms of emotion. And if you can drop a note in the most perfect of places for it to feel a certain way, or to at least attempt to move the audience in a certain way. If you have a guy walk into a bar and you have a shot of his foot sort of step into the bar, and you have a sort of heavy guitar strum, all of a sudden he's a badass, that kind of thing. But if you have something that's a bit sort of more somber, then it creates something totally different. And it's that kind of stuff that's super interesting to me. I think back to when we were speaking to, was it Ollie Howe that came in to speak to us about his documentary stuff. And he was a composer, and he would say about sort of, if he had like a monkey climbing up a tree, he would have a sort of dudum, 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 as it would go up. And it's like, it's weird because you could just have the sound of a monkey climbing up a tree, but adding something that sounds sort of happy and almost like cheeky in that way creates the audience are now going to smile when they look at that. It's super interesting, and it's really fascinating to me. I definitely want to do more sort of soundtrack work, because it's weird. You're kind of creating something that isn't meant to be heard in a way. It's under the dialogue. It's not the focal point of the story at all, but it can add literally a new dimension to it. It adds that you could just have somebody silently walking, and that would be a creative choice, But if you add music to that, all of a sudden you've got to be very precious about what music you're then putting under that, because you're setting up the audience with the story that you're telling. So, if you're having sad music, then that's your intention. If you're having happy music, then it's the same. If you're trying to build sort of tempo, it actually all comes down to music. And the best way to go with that is by watching something without the sound. Mute something that has sound over it and watch it, and see what you garner from it. See what you get from it. Likelihood is you'll probably still hear that music that is over it in your head, but then that just goes to show how perfectly it fits. But you can always play other music over a film. I've done that several times, just to see how much it doesn't work, or just to see how much it might work. So yeah, really, really, really interesting to me. It's something that one of our lecturers are actually, she's going to help me set up, hopefully, a bit of a website, or like a bit of a hub that I can put all my stuff on. Because at the moment I'm using like Soundcloud and stuff for very early demos. But now that I've got the sort of recording equipment at home, I'm hoping to sort of essentially finish all the songs that I've done demos for, and also do the same for sort of film scores, or maybe even potentially sort of advertise that I like to do that, not for money, to be honest. I'm at the moment, it's something that I'm really enjoying sort of practicing with, to see if I can sort of unlock that side of things. So yeah, hopefully I can build a sort of little website or something that I can have everything on. But yeah, film soundtracks are, man, they're half the film for me. They really are. There's not a lot of films that don't have music in. Equally excellent when they do, when they don't have music. But for me, yeah, music is such a big part of what carries the film between moments, and whether or not that's sort of crafted for it or chosen. I think that choice that is made is super interesting, and again comes from a place of writing, comes from a place of planning, and we're looking to have this feel for this film, so we need something that sounds like this. And man, the amount of times that must have happened where someone's like, right, we've got this, and we put AC/DC over it, and we can't afford AC/DCs, but we want something that has this drive, and then they'll get something made that is not a rip-off of it, but has that same drive. I think back to at the moment I'm studying American independent cinema, and Easy Rider is a really famous example of one that did that. And he was listening, they were listening to all kinds of hits from from at the time, and managed to get rights to nearly all of them. And it's kind of another part of what made that film such a big cult success, because it was independently funded, but it had these huge hits in them. And there you go. They played those, and then people went to see it and were like, man, it's got this song in it, and it becomes sort of a cult hit. It's kind of, I think back to The Breakfast Club as well. At the end of that, the "Don't you forget about me," and those kind of moments in films that didn't have huge budgets as well. And it's really interesting, like that choice, and what that can sort of do for a film.
It is such a fascinating subject, and like one of my favorite movies, and it's one that on the Sunday night edition of the show I plan, and it's one of my favorite films, and it's one of the ones I want to review on one of my Sunday evening editions of the show, is No Country for Old Men. And that film has no score except for the credits, which is really fascinating because it doesn't feel like it's missing it. So for me, it's really interesting how a film can either take away music or put it in, and that changes it. And like, I guess Easy Rider and No Country for Old Men are polar opposites on that.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, exactly. But that creative choice is the super interesting part for me. Is like you just said, is you don't even realize that it's not there in No Country for Old Men, because it doesn't need to be, but if you did add it in there, what would it change? And I think that's the really fascinating part, is that you've made something purely visual. Obviously there's audio in there, but you've made something visual, and by adding something foreign to the mix, or composing something but still foreign, literally changes. It either adds a whole new layer, or it pulls it a different way. And I think you're right. It's really, really interesting to see what that does. There's a film, Ready Player One, which I think of as another weird example of this. There's like a really kind of crazy CGI car chase right at the beginning of the film, and it's one that you'd expect would have rock music or something over the top of it, and there's actually none. It's only something I really recently realised, that it's just the sound of car engines and the sort of sounds that would come from that situation, and sort of screeching tyres and everything else that's going on. And it's just, again, that was a really interesting thing where I was like, do you know what? This has no music, and there's no like theme to it or anything like to sort of set the tempo. It's literally just the sounds of sort of metal. And again, that creative choice was made for a reason.
And my final example before we move on, there's a film called Swiss Army Man, which is a sort of a really fun, weird, quirky Daniel Radcliffe movie. And in that movie, well, what I found out from an interview from the filmmakers on it, they wanted to make a film that included a lot of the things they hate, which is an interesting way of making it. So the entire score for the movie is a cappella, because none of the filmmakers like a cappella music. So they committed to making the whole score. And I didn't realize until that interview that the whole film was a cappella. And it really, really works for the dreaminess of the movie, because it's got a surreal feeling to it. So I'd fully recommend Swiss Army Man. It's a crazy film for sure, but the whole film is done with that really experimental way of, hey, let's take something that we don't see often and that we don't really like, and try and work with it and see what we can make. And I think they made something beautiful.
That's crazy that they've clearly made a film that they're very passionate about, and then they've added music that they're very much not passionate about, and they've made something. I think that's the point, is that they've made something.
Swiss Army Man is something. Right, so we've got one more talking point with Luke I'd like to go through. I'd like to go through, because obviously at the moment we're currently in lockdown still at the time of recording. It's the 13th of May 2020 as at the time of recording for the context of this. But I'd love to make our last talking point sort of about live music and what that experience is like. But that's what me and Luke have had to say so far about the music creating process. If there's any comments you'd like to leave about what we've talked about, you can leave them below, or you can go to the Facebook page at the My Generation Podcast. We'd love to get some of your points over to Luke, so please do let us know. And before we go into just our quick little chat to round off the show about live music, I wanted to tease ahead a few more guests that we've got coming up on the future of the show. So coming up in the next couple of weeks, we've got the Drama Society, which I will scarily be the president of this year, but we will be talking with the previous president, Alara, Tom, Serkan and Clarice about the play that the Drama Society put on back in February, what it was like making a theatre production. Alara was the director, Tom was one of the co-stars, Serkan wrote original music for the piece, and Clarice was the writer. So we're going to have a deep dive behind the scenes of theatre. I'm doing an episode about the new look of the My Generation podcast. We've got 3 new features coming to the show in just a couple of weeks. We've got Emma Cusson, who's going to be bringing weekly poetry alongside Sammy and Harry's segments. We've got Tom Axtell, who's going to be on that drama episode. He is going to be doing pirate profiles, a really fun new feature. Every week he's going to be bringing pirate facts to the show. So excited. And we've also got Joe Finnegan, who's bringing video game reviews. So if you're an avid gamer and you want a new game to play every single week, this is the place to be in a couple of weeks. And I'm going to be highlighting and showcasing a new format for the My Generation podcast, a new template thumbnail for the YouTube videos, which is going to make them much easier to navigate if you listen on YouTube. And we've also got Aaron Frith. He is a swing singer based in Kent. Aaron was recently on Britain's Got Talent, and you can find that on YouTube. Really incredible performance. And I'm going to be talking to him about his cover music he does, why swing music is his thing, and actually a deeper dive into a completely different part of the music creating process. But going back to Luke to round off this week's episode of the show, I wanted to go over live music. So Luke, could you talk about maybe why you think live music is such an important part of music in general?
Yeah, of course. Live music is, man, it's a huge passion of mine. Films and music are kind of my 2 favorite things, and watching them as live as possible is kind of a part of that as well. Going to the cinema is one of my favorite experiences of watching films, and it's the same with music. Experiencing it live on a stage or not in a living room, whatever it is huge as well. Briefly, to touch more on why I like playing music live, before I sort of talk about why I think it's so good to experience. For me, it's the sort of last part of writing a song. I've played lots of covers and stuff at like open mics, which is really great. It's a great experience. I think you probably had a similar experience. You were just talking about the Drama Society and things like that, and how you hadn't done a lot of performing in front of people, but it's a real buzz when you do it. And I feel like it's very, very similar when you play music, whether you've written that or not. Just that sort of vulnerability of playing on stage, and you're like, okay, I'm not in my bedroom anymore, and there are people looking at me, whether it's 10 people or 100. You're doing it, and I think that's really wonderful. But in terms of playing my own original stuff, I think I've spoken to you before about a place in Folkestone called the Heart Brew Strung, which is just the best place. Used to go to an open mic there, which just became like a social club for a bunch of us. Met one of my favourite musician friends there, Finley Leslie. She's wonderful, and we used to go there every week. We wrote songs together and played covers and stuff. But my favourite moments of playing music live is definitely playing the songs that you've written, because whether or not people engage with them at all, it's the sort of last step of a song for me. It's out there, whether or not people go take it. For you, it's something that you've written and played several millions of times in your bedroom or whatever, and perfected to some extent, and then you play it to someone else, and they, just like we spoke about earlier, take it the way they do. Take it. They listen to it and they're like, man, I really liked this song. Like, it speaks to me about this, or I loved that part. And I think when you play something live, it's the sort of opposite of what we said about films, where sound adds this other dimension. I think when you're watching it live, again, you get this complete new dimension, this sort of third dimension in front of you. You're watching somebody play, where if they're playing an acoustic song and it's very sort of stripped back and vulnerable, and you're just all. I watched a band called Daughter play a set in a church in St John's Church at Hackney, and it was all very, very sort of stripped back, and everyone stood in silence. Nobody even sang along. It was just absolute silence, and it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever watched, because it was just raw. Just listening to sort of the acoustics bounce off the wall, and then everyone would sort of clap, obviously, in between. But it wasn't like a normal sort of live concert you'd expect, even for a band like that. But again, then you go to sort of stadium rock shows, and it adds this whole new element of entertainment, and a show that's actually sort of choreographed, or there's production, and that adds something totally new to a set and songs and things like that. But I think, live music is so important to me. It's one of my favorite things, is whether I'm sat in a cinema or if I'm watching someone play live. I just think it's the most inspiring thing, because especially watching someone play live, because they are literally in front of you playing that. At any point they could mess up. Not that that's the end of the world, but they're playing it there and then, and they will have written that song, in their bedroom or on their patio, and those lyrics have come from somewhere deep within them, and they're singing it to you, and you're taking that in, and you're churning that up, digesting it in your own way, and there's just something that's a gift. That is an absolute gift. I think if you've got an album that you love, and I imagine anyone that's listening to this right now is, especially if you've gotten this far, you obviously like music, and you have albums that you go back to for whatever reason, whether it reminds you of a time or it's just something you love. It's something that was created by somebody, and it resonates with you, and you digested that in your own way, and it becomes almost like a part of your life. I have albums that I'm like, man, that just takes me back to 2004, or something like that. I had that with American Idiot by Green Day, which is like an album. As soon as I hear any song from that album, I'm like, I'm in school again. I'm absolutely in school. And I think that is it's so powerful, but it's certainly a gift. And I think if you can experience music live, if you can put up with going to stand in a sweaty room with a lot of other people, or however you want to enjoy it. I quite like the sort of jumping around to sort of punk bands as well, because I think there's something beautiful about that too. There's a lot of punk bands that I love. Some of my favorite live shows have been by a band called the Menzingers, because that's what they're about. That's what their songs are. They're a whole different side of embracing life, and it's not necessarily happy, but even if the lyrics are sad, I have a similar thing with Frightened Rabbit. Even if the lyrics are sad, if you're all in one room, you're in a room full of people that all feel that same way about you, about that song, because you all bought a ticket, you're all there experiencing it, and it feels like a weird family, I think. And certainly when you start going to see a band enough times, and if you go to like the London leg of the tour and you see someone again that you're like, they were at the last show, all of a sudden you feel like you know people. And I imagine people probably have that with music, is like, oh, you're wearing a Blink-182 t-shirt, we're friends, and it's like, well, I've never even spoken to you, but all of a sudden we get each other on some random level, and it's really bizarre. But I think I think live music is both playing it live, which is terrifying but just unbelievably fun, and certainly rewarding, because I don't think I'm like the best performer at all, and in fact I close my eyes when I perform. I look down. I'm terrible at audience participation, all of that kind of stuff. But playing those songs live to me is like, man, I wrote this, I'm putting it out there now, and it's sort of that last step of the songwriting process. Playing it live, it's kind of like, well, that's done now. It's sort of ticked off. I've shown it to other people. It's a thing.
Yeah, I had one example relating to sort of that I wanted to just discuss, because what you said about people getting to know each other. So I, up until just before lockdown started, really wasn't a big festival person of any description. I hadn't been to any ever, and so in the start of the year I started doing filming for the rock band Renegade, who we had on the show, and going to that, and it was at the Hartpury Strung, and having that atmosphere was incredible. But the specific example I wanted to bring up, I went to my first ever concert with Harry, who does the film reviews on our show. We both went to see Starset because they're one of our favourite bands. Love their music, and that was incredible. We really enjoyed listening to Starset live, and what you said about it connecting people. When we got out of the show after we just experienced this music, it was a great release of energy because their music's so fast, and I felt that. And we got out, as we were sort of walking back to the station with all of the other hundreds of Starset fans all going the same way. There was a mother and a son who had gone to that concert as well, and it was their first ever concert as well. We got just talking about the experience, and that was incredibly nice. And it's one of the things I actually remember the most about the entire evening, was just having this really nice chat with two other people who had just also for the first time experienced this type of music and live, and celebrated it, which I love what that all does. And now we're going to go back to Luke in just a moment to wrap up this week's episode of the show. I have one more question for him, but there are future topics that I still would like to talk about on the show. I want to talk board games again. We've talked board games on the podcast before, but I want to hear about more of them. You can always get in touch with the Facebook page at the My Generation Podcast if you are, part of a board game cafe, you play games yourself. I really want to talk with you if you're between the ages of 18 and 35 and you live in Kent. Now, before we close this,
oh man, I have the guy for you. I'm sorry to cut in. I have the guy for that. I'm definitely going to recommend somebody.
Then that guest may already be booked, and that is a little tease for a future episode of the show coming soon. But yeah, Luke, go back to the question I ask at the end of every single My Generation podcast episode. I want to ask you what you think you've learned by talking about your music creating process here on today's episode.
That's a really good question. It's kind of it certainly made me think about it when I haven't. I mean, it could just be because, like you said, we're currently in lockdown. But I think I think this goes for a lot of things, but I don't think people give themselves credit for things that they do ever, and they can forget what they have done. And I think again. The Hartpury Strung is a small sort of bar in Folkestone, but playing to people there, to me, it's playing in front of people, and those were, every time I do that, it's a huge deal to me. Doesn't matter if it's not 100,000 people at Wembley Stadium. It's 10 people in it that I'm then going to get off the stage and talk to and have a beer with or whatever. And I think it's weird thinking about it. Since we've been talking about it, it's kind of it's certainly given me a bit of a drive. I think when you start talking about things with somebody, you sort of realize how much you like or don't like something. I think that's quite evident, of course, but I don't know. People don't talk as much as they once did. They text each other and send emojis and stuff. And I feel like when you talk about things, you really you get another side to things, like we just spoken about, is you get another opinion, and you get quite literally another point of view. And I think that you can only learn more things by getting that from other people. So yeah, sitting and sort of thinking back on times that I have played music live or written songs, it's also reminded me of how many notes I have on my phone that I really need to finish. But I think the thing I would take most from talking about this has actually been that I've got an awful lot of songs that I have not finished, and coming on here and talking about music has made me realize, like, next time I do this, I want those to be finished songs and not just, oh yeah, I'm working on this, because you can do that forever. You can just push off something and not finish something. But I think I really need to sort of bite the bullet on a lot of my ideas and put them out as what they are, as opposed to holding on to them. And then in a couple of years, I'll be like, oh, well, I'm not really into that anymore. So then it changes. And I think there's something actually quite beautiful about putting out, like we said about earlier, music at that stage in your life. I think back to quite recently, Paramore, really successful band. Hayley Williams, who writes all the front woman who writes all of the music, she said that they're not going to play a couple of their most famous songs anymore, and it didn't go down particularly well with fans. But actually, her reasoning was that when they first put out those songs, she was 16, and those songs were her diary, essentially. The songs that made that band famous were quite literally her diary. And that must be it. Can you imagine having to sing your 16-year-old's diary every night? I can only imagine how weird that must be. So yeah, it's a really sort of vulnerable feeling. But I think what it has done is made me realize that there are a lot of things that I'm just going to put out and be like, look, this isn't how I feel all of the time, but this is, I wrote a song at this point, and this is what it is, and people that are really into music will ask what it's about. But like you have said, and like 80% of the people, no doubt, they take what they get from it. And I think that is everybody's right as a music listener, to interpret exactly what it is you want, whatever it is in that moment. I've had a lot of songs where they've been playing on my iPod. Man, I sound ancient. They're playing on my iPod. At that just at that moment, there was an Angels and Airwaves song. I remember being on a run, and it just kicked in at the point I was at the peak of this hill, and I was like, "Yep, I have to hit this point every time now I hit this run." So then I made this playlist that went from that, because it was like I want that feeling every time. And it again, I can't imagine that Tom DeLonge wrote that song like, yeah, listen to this when you're running down a hill. But it became that for me, and it becomes lots of different things for other people. And I think that is kind of the most beautiful thing about music.
And there is a song about running up a hill, so it's called Running Up That Hill. So there are always songs more specific to that. But no, that's amazing. That's a really great way to wrap up, Luke. That was Luke Hill, and that's his music creating process. Luke, where can people find you?
Currently mostly on SoundCloud. I've got I think my URL is like / silence is awkward, and that's where I pop up most of my stuff there in various different forms, whether it's like demos or finished stuff. So I would say that's probably where to go. I've got little links from there to like other YouTube stuff, but it's all at the moment. There's sort of a process to sort of put all this in one place, but that will all be popped on SoundCloud anyway. So yeah, SoundCloud is it's great. People should really support SoundCloud, because it's a great thing that people it's sort of got forgotten, but it's sort of making a bit of a resurgence. But yeah, really enjoy SoundCloud. So yeah, check out SoundCloud. That would be where it is.
Stuff. Well, and people might already be listening to this on SoundCloud, so just you can pop onto the search bar. And so there's so much great stuff coming up on the future of the show. Thank you for that, Luke. We've got the play, we've got the brand new look of the podcast, and we've got Aaron Frith music creating process coming up in the future, and that board game episode that we're going to have to talk about post show. But if you're also interested in board games, I please do still encourage you to get in touch, because I could talk board games for days. So if we have 2 episodes on board games, I am completely happy with that. So it is a goodbye from Luke.
It is indeed. Thank you very much for having me on.
Thank you so much, Luke. And to end the show, we're once again going to play Long Way Home, just to finish off the episode. Thank you all so much for listening. We've got Sunday evening edition of the show as well, where I'll be talking about a anecdote film review or something else. Tune in on Sunday night at 6 o'clock to hear that, and next Thursday for our next guest. So it is Luke Hill's A Long Way Home to finish the show, and I'll tune in with you next time for the next episode of the My Generation podcast.
I'll share my body warmth with yours, and walk you home along the shore, and put your left hand in my right, and let our fingers intertwine. It's a long way home. it's a long way home. Can we go back the way we came? I think my shoes have seen better days. Retrace the steps we made, just to make the same mistakes. Turn around, 'cause I've lost my way. And maybe I'll lose my mind, but I'll be back someday. Oh, how could I have been so blind? How did I get so far behind? Oh, it's such a long way home. I'm learning life is far too short to waste your time matching socks. Take your chances, let your voice be heard. Fill the skyline with your words. Oh, turn around, 'cause I've lost my way. And maybe I'll lose my mind, but I'll be back someday. Oh, how could I have been so blind? How did I get so far behind? Oh, it's such a long way home. Turn around, 'cause I've lost my way. And maybe I'll lose my mind, but I'll be back someday. Oh, how could I have been so blind? How did I get so far behind? Oh, it's such a long